The New York Rangers take a 2-1 lead in their series against the Florida Panthers with a dramatic overtime win. The Dallas Stars managed to even their series with the Edmonton Oilers, and the Vancouver Canucks reflect on a disappointing end to a great season. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here. Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On New York Rangers, Chik. And John, has your blood pressure gone down since this dramatic Game 3 overtime win by the Rangers?
I don't think it has, Gil. That's just crazy stuff. You know, we were talking right before we hit record. Playoff overtime hockey, there's really nothing quite like it. And, I'm just glad the Rangers were able to dig deep and find a way, because in the third period, it obviously wasn't looking good, giving up the 2 goals. But, Rangers were really back on their heels in the final 5 minutes there. Obviously the game's tied at that point, and Panthers are pressing and looking like they might get the go-ahead goal there. And my thought as a Ranger fan was, man, just get this game to overtime. Like, it felt like it wasn't going to happen for the Rangers at the end of regulation in terms of scoring a goal. You never know for sure, but they were really back on their heels there. And my mindset is, well, we're 3-0 in overtime. And, if we can at least escape the third period here, at least they have a chance to go into the locker room, regroup, say what needs to be said, eat an orange or two, whatever you got to do there, and come back ready to go. And honestly, even in the overtime, I felt like the Panthers probably had the better of play. But you also know, as a hockey fan, it just takes one chance, and that's what they got. And what a heck of a job by all the guys on the ice to, fight for the possession on the overtime winner and then linger in the shot. And Wennberg is your unlikely hero, but we'll certainly take it.
Yeah, talk to me about Wennberg coming up big the way he did.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. And I got to give a shout out. I'm going to do a live episode a little bit later, and somebody in the chat the other day was saying that Wennberg is going to have his moment, and I'm going to have that person's name ready to go for my episode a little bit later. But, Wennberg, they bring him over at the deadline, and it's one of those things. It's like, okay, it's a nice pickup. Certainly somebody that's a defensive specialist first. That was only his second goal as a member of the Rangers. But, I mean, that's the beauty of this sport. A lot of other sports, you're looking at, I mean, there can be an unlikely hero, of course. But, basketball, you're going to get the ball to your best player. And obviously football, the quarterback has a lot to say. And baseball pitching is obviously huge. But hockey, man, you pretty much have to roll everybody out there just about. And it could be anybody on any given night. And Alex Wennberg, I mean, first of all, winning the faceoff. And he got some great help on that play from Kakko and Roslovic. All those guys were fighting their tails off to get possession of the puck for the Rangers. And that was huge. They eventually work it back to Lindgren. And great job on Wennberg, getting to the front of the net and redirecting the puck there, getting to where he needed to be. And again, unlikely hero, but that's one of the coolest things about playoff hockey is it can be anybody on any given night.
Talk to me about the resilience of this team, because to give up a 2-goal lead in the third period, holding on and then bouncing back to win it in overtime, what does that say about the emotional makeup of this Rangers team?
I think it says a lot. And really, that's what I've been seeing pretty much all year. I mean, there's nights where, they don't have it just like any other team in hockey. But when you watch this team over the course of the season, anytime there's some adversity or anytime they're coming off of a rough performance or whatever it might be, it feels like they find a way to be at their best. And obviously in the third period, they were not at their best, although I would argue that was the Panthers playing excellent hockey, more so than anything the Rangers were doing wrong. But they hung in there, and that's kind of been a trademark of this team. They don't get too high. They don't get too low. It's all about the next shift. And I thought that was a great move by Peter Laviolette, taking that time out in the third period there about midway through after a couple of goals have been given up and just getting them back into it. They got a mini push after that happened, and then it was all Florida for the rest of the third. But overall, again, I love this team's makeup. And could they have pulled that off 2 years ago? I mean, possibly, giving up the 2-goal lead and still winning it in overtime. But this year's team, everybody's 2 years older, 2 years more mature. And you saw a good example of that today.
Talk to me about Igor Shesterkin. Yeah, he gave up the 2 goals in the third period, but when your team is outshot 37-23 and they still win, the goalie had to do something right.
Yeah, no, Igor's been awesome, and I think today is a great example of why you can't always just look at the box score. I mean, there were a couple of absolute snipes by the Panthers, like that shot by Forsling that tied it. I'm not sure there's a goalie on this planet that's stopping that shot. And one of the power play goals he gave up earlier, that deflected off of, I think it was Miller. I think it went off of Miller into the net, and same thing. There's not much you can do there. But regardless of how the game's going or what the score is or where we are in the series, or whatever it might be, I'll always bet on Igor Shesterkin to make big saves when they count. And the last 5 minutes of that third period, man, he was amazing. He is the only reason why the Panthers did not get the go-ahead goal late there in the third. A couple saves in overtime too, and he's the man. What else can you say? It's Igor Shesterkin, and I'm glad he's on our team.
Give me an unsung hero so far in this series for the Rangers.
That's a great question. I'm going to go ahead and say Ryan Lindgren. Now, he did have the primary assist at the end of the game there, so he stands out in that way. But, man, this guy he has his hard hat on every single night, and he just goes out there and goes to work. I mean, he's bleeding all over the ice, and I thought he was big time in this game today. I thought Keandre Miller and Jacob Trouba kind of had a rough afternoon. They were on the ice for a couple of goals against, and Trouba's taken 3 penalties, and that's a whole other controversy in and of itself. The elbow there. But Ryan Lindgren stepped up, and he's out there with Adam Fox, and Fox is playing injured. It's pretty obvious that he is, and Lindgren is kind of I think picking up the slack there as well. Fox is doing the best he can, but again, this is hard-nosed, gritty hockey between these two teams. I mean, they are hitting each other. It's physical, it's nasty, and Ryan Lindgren's right at home in an environment like that. So I'm going to go with Ryan Lindgren for the unsung hero so far.
What does it take? I mean, these two teams seem so evenly matched. We've had 3 really good games so far. What's it going to take for the New York Rangers to emerge victorious in this hard-fought series?
Yeah, I think you're just going to have to, first of all, continue to play with desperation. Something that I said against the Canes in the Canes series, once it went 3-2 and everybody's panicking and, oh my God, they're going to blow the 3-0 lead. I said for game 6, man, treat this like you are down 3 games to 2, not like you're up. Act like you've got no room for margin. I think the same kind of desperation, urgency is going to be needed against this Panther team because, Ranger fans are feeling good right now, and they should. But, man, we are not done with this team by a long shot. I mean, there's a long way to go here. And obviously they got game 4 in their barn. I think that's first and foremost, though. They have to match and potentially even eclipse the kind of desperation the Panthers are going to be playing with in the next one. And I think also, the Rangers star players have to step up a little bit. It's been awesome to see Barclay Goodrow go off these last couple of games and score all these big goals, and Lafreniere, huge game today. But, sooner or later, the brand names, Mika and Kreider and Panarin and, Fox is playing injured, but a little more from him would be nice too. Sooner or later, those guys are going to have to step up. And I don't think it's a lack of effort or anything like that. You see people say things like that. I think they're just going up against a great team. And in the case of Mika and Kreider, they're matched up against the Barkov line pretty often, and not easy to do a lot of damage against them. But one way or another, I do think, those guys are going to have to, find the score sheet a couple of times. And I'll also throw the power play out there too, because, that's obviously been a strength of the Rangers this season. And I think at this point, they're down to like 1 for their last 23 or 24 on the power play or something like that. And I mean, props to the Panthers and even the Canes before them. They've done a great job on the kill, but it's good they can win without it, but that's been such a weapon for them. You'd love to be able to see them get that going again at some point too.
What worries you the most about facing the Panthers for the rest of this series?
I would say just that team's ability to grind. I mean, that team is built and they play a style that is just like tailor-made for playoff hockey. I think that's why, a lot of people were picking them to win the cup this year. That's why going into the playoffs, everybody's saying that the Panthers are going to be a really tough out. And if I'm not mistaken, they were the betting favorites against the Rangers in this Eastern Conference final here. So, so deep, so strong, just a big team, a tough physical team. And, I think they're a mentally tough team too. We saw that last year against the Bruins. Obviously, the Bruins had that historic regular season, and they go up 3-1, and there's overtime games and everything, and the Panthers find a way to rally and come back, and they take it all the way to the finals. So that's a team that is not going to go away, and is going to grind. And like I said, I think they're built for playoff hockey, but I think the Rangers are too, and I don't think they get enough credit for that.
All right, John, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find the podcast and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, wherever you're listening to this or watching this, you can find Locked On New York Rangers as well. We are on YouTube. And if you want to find me on social media, I'm on Twitter at JChik17. Go ahead, give me a follow, and we'll talk some Ranger hockey and have some fun.
All right, John, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Gil. Appreciate it.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Hockey fans, use your knowledge of the NHL on FanDuel. You can check out all the odds on who's going to win any one game in the playoffs. Maybe you want to bet on which team wins the Eastern or Western Conference Final, or which team is going to win the Stanley Cup, or how about betting on the Conn Smythe Trophy as the playoff MVP? You can check out all the latest odds at FanDuel. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Dallas Stars, Joey Erickson. And Joey, big win in Game 2 for the Stars. Close one, little empty net goal at the end to pull it out. What was the difference in Game 2 as compared to Game 1?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on again, Gil. Hopefully we get to meet a few more times. So that means the Stars are doing pretty well here down the stretch. I thought they did a few things better from Game 1 to 2. And honestly, I don't think the Stars have played their best hockey as of yet in this series. In that first period especially, they were on their heels, and Edmonton outshot Dallas 16-4 in that first period. But the final two periods are more of what Pete DeBoer and company are looking for. Edmonton only had a combined 13 shots in the final two periods, and Dallas was able to tighten up defensively. Something I really took away from Game 2 was just their board play. And we know at this time of year, the game is played on the outskirts of the rink, and it's heavy, it's physical. And I thought for the most part in Game 1, the Oilers' forecheck was really, really good. They forced Dallas into a lot of turnovers, and they really struggled getting out of their own zone. But in Game 2, Dallas was really, really strong defensively, especially on the wall. They won a lot of those 50-50 pucks. And I think they just upped the physicality a bit. They out-hit Edmonton 31-19 in the game, and they just added a more grit to their style in Game 2, and I think they started to wear down Edmonton a bit. More importantly, when you talk about the Edmonton attack, they really neutralized the Oilers off the rush. I thought Dallas killed a ton of plays, especially at their own blue line. If you look at McDavid and Hyman, Draisaitl, who have a ton of speed that like to create off the rush, Dallas did a great job of keeping better gap and was able to pressure them off the puck, force them into a dump-in attempt, or at least just throwing it to an area, which allowed Dallas to get numbers to the puck and defend with numbers. There was always 2 or 3 green sweaters on a white sweater, which is exactly what Dallas is trying to do in their own zone. And yeah, I think it was a combination. They just tightened some things up defensively. They're still not firing on all cylinders. They weren't as crisp in Game 1. They started to find a bit of rhythm in Game 2. And credit to Pete DeBoer, he's having to shuffle the lines around. He's having to throw some guys in different spots to inject some life into the lineup. But one line that really stood out in Game 2 was Johnston's line, along with Ben and Stankoven. They were creating chaos in the offensive zone against Edmonton. Every time they were on the sheet, it seemed like they were generating scoring chances. And I think if Dallas can build off of that and continue to do that, they'll be just fine in this series. And that line in particular, if you look at the end of the first period, they had a great shift. They didn't score on it. Skinner made a couple of huge stops. But that momentum from that shift carried into the second period and then the third, so on and so forth. And this is my long-winded version of saying that the Dallas Stars got better as the game wore along, and they may have not played their best hockey yet in the series, but they're tied at 1 heading to Edmonton on the road where they played their best hockey all year long.
Give me an unsung hero for Dallas in game 2, a guy who maybe didn't show up in the box score, but did the little things that helped Dallas turn the tide and eventually win the hockey game.
Yeah, I think I would give an unsung hero award to Stankoven. I really liked his first game, and he's just a player that is always going to make an impact, even if he isn't on the score sheet, because he just has such a high motor. He buzzes around. He's really a lot of fun to watch, and I'm sure anybody that's catching Stars games here over the last few weeks, number 11 stands out because he is like a little water bug out there. He's so shifty. He's mobile. He's just a pest to play against. And he's not Brad Marchand. He's not, he doesn't come with the baggage, so to speak. And he is just a rookie. Maybe he'll get to that at some point, but he's really, really tough to play against. And he creates a lot of turnovers and he generates chances off of that. And him and Wyatt Johnston are a great little pair together. Another guy I would like to shed some light on would be Ryan Suter. Of course, he had the assist on the game-winning goal on Marchand's deflection, but he's been so good throughout the playoffs, and there's been a lot of talk about him over the past few years and his contract buyout, and he wasn't living up to his deal, so to speak, here in Dallas. But him playing as the fifth defenseman for Dallas, he is a really, really good fifth defenseman. He's not what he used to be. We understand that, but he came up with a couple of huge blocks in game 2. I mean, multiple Stars did. They blocked a ton of shots. I think they had 20 on the night, but Suter turning into a really, really solid fifth defenseman for this team just shows the depth now that Dallas has on the back end. And I don't think you could even say that 3 months ago. The acquisition of Tanev has really helped. It bumps Suter down just a bit more. And it just gives the Stars some more firepower up and down the lineup. So Stankoven and Suter definitely need their due.
Talk to me about injuries. I know both teams have missed players already, and we're only 2 games into the series. How have injuries affected the series so far, and what impact do you think they'll have moving forward?
Yeah, well, Roope is traveling with the team, which is good news for Stars fans. And Pete DeBoer mentioned if it was a game 7, he probably would have been in the lineup. So that's a good indicator. He's probably going to play in either games 3 and 4. And obviously, Roope Hintz is a big loss for Dallas. And it was unfortunate, the timing of his injury, because he started to find a rhythm and scored a bit more in that Colorado series. And then, of course, he gets taken out in the middle of game 4. How I describe the Hintz losses is it doesn't allow Dallas to necessarily have all their forwards in their most successful roles. Pete DeBoer has to find a way to put guys in the right spots and find the right, I guess, cohesiveness between guys in order to get some offensive consistency. If it's one thing the Stars have struggled with offensively, it's just consistency of rolling 4 lines, and they're still doing a great job without him. But when Roope Hintz is in the lineup, then you can have Marchment play with Duchesne and Sagan, which was a line that played together for pretty much all year long. They were the most consistent and probably best line for Dallas all season long. So without him, DeBoer's had to be creative, and Johnson's had to move around a bit. Pavelski's had to move around a bit. So it is a big loss offensively. I think Dallas can win the series against Edmonton without him. I don't think they can win the Stanley Cup without him, because I think he's that important. And on Edmonton's side, obviously with Henrique, and I know he's close to returning too. That's just another big body depth piece for them that they're missing. And you have to tip your cap to Edmonton. Their bottom 6 has been fantastic here in the first 2 games, which is what they need to beat Dallas, who, of course, is flexing some of that depth. And I think you can argue their bottom 6 has outplayed Dallas here in the first 2 games. That's something that really, really needs to change for the Stars here moving forward.
So what are the keys for the Stars to win this series?
Yeah, one I keep coming back to, and I I touched on it at the beginning is special teams in particular. And I know that's making some waves here over the past day about some of the Oilers. And of course, head coach Chris Knobloch mentioning that they want a few more power plays, which I understand. I completely get it. They had a historically good power play a year ago. They have the best power play in the postseason this year. Like, hell yeah, they want some power plays because it's absolutely deadly. And they had 25 power plays in a 5-game series against LA. They had, I think it was 18 against Vancouver. I think they may have felt they've been spoiled a bit and they want some more power plays. But at the same time, Dallas has been really disciplined. And this isn't just a trend in the postseason. Dallas, I think, was 32nd in the league this year of penalty minutes. They don't take a lot of penalties and they defend really, really hard. So I don't blame them for trying to knock at the refs, so to speak. They're going back home and maybe they get the benefit of the doubt here. But if Dallas stays out of the box and they play it at 5-on-5, I think they're going to have a really, really good shot at winning this series. And Skinner has been phenomenal here in the first 2 games. Got to give him a lot of credit. Can he keep it up? That's one of my things I'm looking at games 3 and 4. How much of this Skinner are we going to get moving forward? Because we haven't seen it in a large sample size. But he has definitely been great. So I think if the Stars continue to put pressure on Skinner and they stay out of the box, even though the Edmonton PK has been phenomenal, as long as Dallas doesn't put themselves in the hole special teams wise, they can be just fine. Because it's already extremely hard to defend Draisaitl, McDavid, and company. Do not give them the extra time and space to make plays on the man advantage.
No doubt, no doubt. Joey, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Absolutely. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube, of course, Locked On Stars. Please be sure to subscribe. You can follow Locked On Stars on Twitter. I'm at Joey the Jet 19 as well for some Stars content. And hopefully the Stars will play here a bit long. But it's shaping up to be a great series. I mean, the first 2 games were a lot of fun. And this is a fun time of year to be watching hockey. So appreciate having me on once again, Gil, and hopefully I see you soon again.
Thanks, Joey. Always a pleasure. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Canucks, Trevor Beggs. And Trevor, sorry things didn't work out in Game 7, but overall, a great season for the Canucks. But what happened in the playoff series that they ended up falling just short?
Yeah, I think the Vancouver Canucks ended up getting their just desserts, right? I mean, by the end of the series, by the end of 7 games, they were not the better team. Now, there was still a path for them to win, and, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I'm thinking, if they get 10 shots on goal more in Game 7, they probably bury an extra 1 or 2 on Skinner and maybe win that series. But, Artur Shilovs, as great as he was, he just wasn't Thatcher Demko. It was a close series, right? 6 of 7 games decided by 1 goal. So, at the end of the day, kind of like you alluded to, it was a fantastic season for the Vancouver Canucks. Most prognosticators had picked them to miss the playoffs. Never mind win the division, never mind win a round. That most people picked them to miss the playoffs heading into the season. And, Jim Rutherford had that famous quote that, if everything goes right, we're a playoff team. And, almost everything did go right for Vancouver, and they were one of the best teams in the NHL this season.
How big a loss was Thatcher Demko for this team? And do you think they win the series if he's 100% healthy for this series against Edmonton?
Yeah, I do. You can call me biased. I don't really care. I think they win with Thatcher Demko and net. And, again, for those who watch the games, Artur Shilovs was fantastic. I mean, you look at his numbers in the series against Edmonton, he had an .898 save percentage. So it's nothing that really screams elite goaltender. But, man, oh, man, Artur Shilovs was so clutch. Made so many amazing saves in that series. And, he gets the shutout, too, to get the win in round 1 over Nashville as well. So Artur Shilovs was so good for the Vancouver Canucks. Again, not even 20 games of NHL experience after this playoff run, 10 of them coming in this postseason. So goaltending is so weird because he was a guy I watched in the AHL this season. And I'm thinking, like, man, is this guy ready? He had some shaky games down there. It didn't look fantastic. And he was so good for the Canucks in the playoffs. But, yeah, to answer your question, again, I think if Demko's in there, I think he makes a couple extra saves. I think the Canucks probably move on.
Well, we will never know, but I don't think that's an unreasonable position. Rick Tocchet wins the Jack Adams Award as the NHL's Coach of the Year. Tell me why he deserved it and, what he did this year to help this team reach their potential.
Yeah, and it starts with structure, which gets tossed around a lot, right? He really did bring a structure in place. And look, Canuck fans know this has been a team that hasn't played good defense for the better part of 10 years now, right? That's a long, long, long time where this team has just been atrocious defensively. And, it was the same under Green, it was the same under Boudreau. Going back to even Willie Desjardins, the defense kind of sunk us in the playoffs back then. So, he really brought a good structure in place. And I think one of the most incredible things about the Canucks turnaround here, Gil, is, in this market, we're looking at the other two Jack Adams winners, right? Pat Quinn won Coach of the Year back in 91-92. Alain Vigneault won in 06-07. For Pat Quinn's year, that was the year Pavel Bure broke into the league. So that helps the coach out. When Alain Vigneault won, that was Roberto Luongo's first year with the Canucks, where he was, should have won the Vezina. He was up there in the Hart voting. Rick Tocchet didn't have any major additions. So to me, that's one of the craziest things about this turnaround is that the Canucks, they bought out OEL and they added some pieces, but they did not have a Pavel Bure or a Roberto Luongo coming in here to elevate this team. Like, this was all Rick Tocchet and his staff coaching this team up, again, getting them to play for each other, getting them to play good defense. I think they brought the most of the Quinn Hughes. They really brought the most of everyone in that defense core. I think Rick Tocchet was great for JT Miller. Man, oh man, that guy goes from second line left winger 5 years ago to 100-point bona fide number one center going against the opposition's best players every night. He brought the most out of his players. And, for the turnaround this team had compared to, what they did in the offseason, again, adding secondary pieces, but not much else. The job he did was just absolutely incredible. And again, deserving to win Coach of the Year. And I think probably the most deserving Jack Adams winner in Canucks history among the three candidates.
This offseason, lots going on. When we were talking before we started to record, you talked about the rumor mill heating up. Talk to me about, what the Canucks are trying to prevent from happening and what they're trying to make happen during this upcoming offseason.
Yeah, it's a good way to phrase that question. I mean, I think they're trying to prevent, these big onerous contracts for guys that don't deserve them, right? And that's why, Kyle and I made the argument this week that we wouldn't be shocked if Lindholm might be their top priority. Now, I don't think they're going to be able to afford to keep him, to be honest with you. But I think this management team is going to target star power over depth. And that makes me wonder about guys like Dakota Joshua, Nikita Zadorov, these big physical presences who, you'd love to have them back. They were so good in the playoffs. But are those the guys you want to be handing out these big long-term deals to when they're kind of secondary pieces to your team, right? I think the Canucks they desperately want another top six winger. Jake Gensel, I wouldn't be shocked if they try to trade for him at the deadline. I wouldn't be shocked if they target him in free agency. The rumors about Martin Necas right now are interesting, right? And I know people are tying those together because he was rumored to be part of that Pettersson deal that they used to get him to sign. But you can kind of see a world where the Canucks maybe trade Hronek for Martin Necas. I mean, that could make sense for both teams. That being said, I think Hronek's getting a lot of heat in this market for a subpar second half, for not a great playoffs, for being a little bit testy at his end of season press conference. But the Canucks just haven't had a right shot defenseman like him in a long time. And, Kyle and I were saying in the first half of the year, this might be the second best defenseman in Canucks history, Phil Hronek. But again, tail off in the second half, so maybe not so much. But yeah, a lot of interesting contracts here. And I know Hronek's an RFA, so it's a bit different, but it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge to reshape and restructure this team and keep them as competitive as they were, because a lot didn't go right this season. And I think the biggest thing the Canucks have to balance out here is how much money they allocate to forwards versus defense, right? If you go after a Jake Gensel, if you sign an Elias Lindholm, you're probably going to come back with a weaker defense, on paper at least. But if you go for maybe like a Tyler Toffoli type or some of the lesser names out there, I know they want a top six winger, but maybe they don't go big game hunting. Then it probably allows you to ice a defense that's as good, if not better, than last year. So that's, I think, the big balancing act that Canucks got to strike this offseason.
And how does the cap situation fit into all of this? How much cap space do they have right now?
Yeah, so the Canucks have about $26 million of cap space right now, heading into the offseason. And we have people on our show being like, oh, they have 26 million. Why can't they sign Zadorov and Joshua and Lindholm and Hronek? And it's like, you could probably sign 3 of those guys with that money, but you're not signing all 4, right? So for people who are like, oh, we got to keep Zadorov and Joshua and Lindholm, it's like, okay, well, then Hronek's going. So, the Canucks have, I think, 13 roster players. They got to, fill out 10 spots on their roster with $26 million. So it's not an easy task. I do wonder about Ilya Mikheyev. I don't know about the buyout avenue necessarily. Patrick Allvin was pretty complimentary of his work ethic at the end of season presser. But that's a guy making almost $5 million who's, they're looking for a top 6 winger because Ilya Mikheyev is getting paid like that, but he's not that guy. And I just wonder if this team is, has the appetite for another bite after OEL. I'm leaning towards no. Maybe they can swing a deal where they trade him a la like they did with Anthony Beauvillier. Got to swing him for a 6th round pick, 7th round pick. Get that off your books. That would allow them to do a bit more this offseason as well. So, interesting times in Vancouver as always, and curious to see what they do, to be honest. I think there's a lot of guys they love to keep, and they're not going to be able to keep all of them, and they also want to add a top 6 winger on top of that. So, fascinating stuff as always. But hey, Patrick Allvin, Jim Gregory nominee, one of the GMs of the year. I'm curious to see what he's got up his sleeve this offseason.
Well, we shall see, and I know you'll have it covered, you and your co-host, every step of the way. Trevor, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Trev Beggs. I got Instagram as well. I'm not much of a social media guy, but there's Trev Beggsy on Instagram. And then you can find the show Locked On Canucks wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. And that's where we're at, man. Come listen in. Always a fun time in Vancouver.
No doubt about that. Trevor, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise, Gil.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I want to thank my guests. I want to thank John Chik of Locked On New York Rangers, Joey Erickson of Locked On Stars, and of course, Trevor Beggs of Locked On Canucks for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Everydayers, don't forget we're here every weekday, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the league. For those of you in the United States, have a great Memorial Day, and thanks for watching and listening to the Locked On NHL podcast.